Well, I'm excited to bring on our next speaker. Very grateful we could listen to Diego as a case study. And here is another case study that has also won the Inspiring Workplace Award winners in Europe and globally this year. We have a case study from a company called BCD Travel. It's a corporate travel management company. And the person that we're going to be hearing from is Christian Dahl. He's the Executive Vice President of People and Culture there. And Christian defines and leads basically the company-wide employee experience initiatives, heads up the human resources groups worldwide. And in that role, he is in charge of the company's people strategy, employer branding, also looking at the learning and development, talent development programs, as well as the talent acquisition, so the full scope there. And Christian actually began his career in the travel industry in 1993 with a BCD travel company legacy company called Dahl Transport, and is basically over all those years covering all sorts of different areas, from operations to marketing to learning and development, and finally has landed in HR right now. He's coming to us from Copenhagen, so we've gone from Milan to Copenhagen. And I'm excited to hear about his talk, because he's going to be talking about back to the office or not, and really unlocking the potential for remote work. And it'll be interesting to see, because he's going to be sharing a lot of interesting insights in terms of how they're working with virtual work options from and highlight what BCD is doing there, and share about their work from anywhere policy. So let's get into this talk with Christian and look at how it's enhancing the employee well-being and boosting engagement and all sorts of the positive impacts that it's having at their company. So Christian, let me bring you on board here and welcome you to the PeopleFirst Summit. And coming from Stockholm, and I'll pass the baton over to Copenhagen, and we'll look forward to hearing what you have to share with us now as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I know that we're live around the globe for this PeopleFirst Summit. And it is my pleasure to share with you today what we have labeled as back to office or not. What I'm here to do is talk to you not as an expert, but as a practitioner in the field. I think it's very important, as we heard in the previous conversation as well. I want to convey what it is that we're doing at BCD Travel and what's working for us. I'm not an expert to say that everything we're doing will help you, but I'm here to provide some ideas and pointers based on our experience with what has worked for us in looking at, first of all, bringing people out of the office, and now the ongoing debate there is about, is that the right setup? Should people actually come back to office? And seeing some of the big conglomerate companies around the world who've made the decision to bring all their people back to office. And therefore, that is a discussion point with us as well, and part of my presentation for you today. So this guy flying high in the sky is probably a bit too much in saying that that's what we're offering, but we're certainly unlocking the potential on we work from anywhere. And what I'd like to start by doing is adding to the intro we just had about who are we at BCD Travel. We are a leading global travel management company. We do meeting and events. We do global consultancy services around the world. We want to be the world's most trusted, innovative, and sustainable travel management company. Travel management company used to be travel agency, right? Used to be corporate travel agency, but we're much, much more than that, as these pictures will hopefully show. Not only from a workforce standpoint, but the services that we offer to our clients is very diverse. And it's all about keeping the travelers safe for the corporates that we work from, and making them travel smart and achieve more. And in order to do that, we are 15,000 people around the world, and we service clients in more than 170 countries around the world. What is most important, though, here as part of what we're talking about, and what is important from a day-to-day perspective in BCD Travel, is that we are a people-first company. We are in the service industry. Whether we call it travel management or global consultancy services, it's driven by people, and therefore we are a human-centric organization, and we're tech-driven, because we gotta be in our industry in order to stay appealing, stay effective, and help our clients stay effective, travel smart, and achieve more. The way that we achieve this from a people side is we're working with the three C's. We're saying connect, collaborate, and celebrate. That's what we're setting ourselves up for when we want our workforce engaged and effective on a day-to-day basis. And when we look at that from our BCD employee working location and how are we structured as an organization, especially those two C's I just talked about, the connect and the collaborate, is important when you have a 58% virtual workforce. And what's important with that number is I know that there are companies that are higher, but if we look at our journey, we've doubled that number in the last 4 years, which of course was driven by COVID, which impacted our industry probably the most severe. For some people, COVID was a test now and again. For us, it was a complete deflation of our company existence. We went from positive income that one day in March to negative income the day after. That's how fast and how impactful it was. And we were suffering from it for about 2 years flat. We've built back the workforce, we've built back smarter, and that's why we're looking at these numbers. And generally, which you will see from my presentation as well, I am a believer in data. You gotta understand where your people are. You gotta understand the sentiment of your workforce, but you also gotta understand it in order to plan for the steps ahead. Not just look at the data at face value, but look at them in a 360 if you can, to actually understand what does the data show and what do they tell me. So back to 58 virtual, 37 office, and then you're probably wondering on the 5% on the right, what's an implant? An implant in the travel industry is the customers we have where we're sitting on site. We're part of their day-to-day. It could be an implant on an offsite for a offshoring client where we want to be closer to them. It can be a big organization where they want us in-house because they travel so much that they want the flexibility of having us there. We have about 5% of our workforce sitting in organizations. I'll go into more detail about our retention factors and some of the well-being that we've measured, but I think it is important to note that we keep an engagement level and we focus on it very much, which allowed us to be a top 100 inspiring workplace in the past year, as said in the introduction, and we're very proud of that. We actually came in one at the enterprise level in the UK, and we've won Flex Jobs nominations 2 years in a row for the top 100 remote companies around the world, and as a company to watch. But accolades is only worth as much as you can actually back it up. And I will share another thing that I find important as part of this topic, and it is culture. Because every time we have an internal discussion about, oh, how virtual can you go before you actually lose the culture as a company? And I don't think that there's one right answer. Again, I'm no expert, but from our practitioner level, we have countries in our big portfolio where we have a virtual workforce in the 90s. And we're still showing high engagement and high retention numbers from that workforce. So we've talked about, I introduced 3 C's in the beginning. I think there's 3 F's that is important to consider when you talk about culture. Is your culture forced? Is your culture formed? Or is your culture forged? And I think that there is a big difference between the three. And where I believe we stand from a company perspective is we are forged. We have gone through a lot of pain over the years. We're very, very business and environment sensitive business. If there's a financial crisis, it impacts us. 9/11 impacts us. COVID hit us really, really bad. But going from hot to cold, being beat with a hammer in a figurative matter of speech is all part of forging the culture that we now have at BCD Travel. Virtual, office, or implant. We will show in the next couple of slides that we believe that we've maintained that and some of the reasons why we've been able to maintain such a high level of engagement, people-centric, TEV-driven in a virtual environment. Life at BCD is what we call working for us here. We are very focused on having a global intranet. As a global organization, it's important that we represent and show up as being global, but at the same time show that we're regionally and locally anchored. And our global intranet as what we call our digital front door to our BCD employee community plays a vital role in that. And also from an onboarding perspective, we're now making our global intranet available to pre-joiners as well. And part of the reason for that is we want to start the engagement as early as we can with our workforce. I'll give you an example, and it may resonate with some of you. When you're going through a recruitment process, you love your candidates, right? You're talking to your candidates all the time, you're entertaining them, you're interviewing them, you're keeping them appraised of who you are as a company. And when you've decided who you want to work with and you made a mutual agreement, then there is a period of 2, 3, 4 months, depending on what country you're in, before these people actually join. And what we've tend to see is that the love goes down in those periods. And from being highly focused on in the recruitment process to almost us going silent on them for a couple of months to only show our love again when they show up, we wanted to bridge that gap. So with our global intranet, we've opened that up as a bridge in the pre-boarding phase as well. Social communities. We allow for informal exchange on a variety of topics: well-being, travel discounts, sustainability. We have Viva that we've set up for people to have conversations as part of the global intranet to actually share and feel part of something bigger than themselves, which is super important when you're sitting virtual so that you actually have not a community right in front of you, but you have it online at least, and you can share, you can go online with camera, and you can still engage. We have tailored trainings. And one very important part of the topic we're talking about here today is, of course, for managers to lead virtual teams and for employees to work remotely. It was a change that we all had to get used to during and as part of COVID. So we're helping the best way that we can. The next topic I find super important, and I find it very important as a practical example as well from the COVID times where we were all, not just in our industry, but we were all moved home. We couldn't move out. We couldn't meet in offices. We established town halls. It's a platform for two-way communication with leadership. I'm not saying that we're unique in that regard, but I'm saying the impact it had for us when we added the amount of time halls or increased the amount of time halls during COVID. We were all sitting out. We were anxious about what's going on in the world. We were not sure whether our employer was going to pull through of this. We had our CEO show up on a regular basis in front of all our people, being open to taking questions real time from the staff. And we are continuing those town halls from the top CEO down to the individual managing directors in every country. We heard on the previous conversation or previous presentation about employee engagement or surveying staff. We do that as well. We call that our active listening strategy. We provide real-time actionable data to managers. We use a tool that allows for managers to have their own individual dashboard that they can action. They can engage with feedback directly in either an app or in an online version of the tool. And we question, or we don't question, we ask our people on a monthly basis for their feedback about working here at BCD Travel. And we have open-ended questions where we encourage people to provide us feedback on what's on their mind right now. And I can't stress the importance enough for us of it being individual managers having a dashboard, because then you action the feedback as close to the giver as possible. Imagining as an example for us, North America for us is the US and Canada. We have about 4,000 people in the US and about 200 in Canada. If we looked at North America feedback as a region, I'm sure the Canadians would feel overlooked, right? Because 200 out of 4,000, their voice probably wouldn't be heard. But if we go to the MD of Canada and ask him or her to focus on that response, and the individual managers within the regions of Quebec, not Quebec, as Quebec as a region, to look at that in Canada, that's much more powerful, and the response and the active listening strategy is felt much more at an employee level. So we put high effort to that as well. And in our survey, we as well request feedback on health and well-being, because it helps us educate our actions that we need to take in order for our people to increase their health and well-being. We're also very focused on DE&I as a company. We have an SVP leading that sits in the people and culture organization. So we're having senior executive focus on DE&I. And to steer that, we're asking questions on a regular basis in the survey. All of this to show, and what I find important with this is the what, right? Then the question becomes, so how are we doing? And there we come to some of those measurement and stats that I'd like to share with you. What I've done here is that I've looked at our ENPS, so Employee Net Promoter Score. I look at our belief, satisfaction, and well-being across our office employees, which is on the top of the page, and our virtual employees, which is at the bottom of the page. And the middle of the page is the midpoint, right? So the size of the bar on either side of the mid shows the difference, or actually here, the equality in the scores, virtual versus office employees. What we find here is that our engagement score in our virtual workforce is actually slightly lower than it is in our office employees. I'll tell you that that has changed since the last couple of years and months. So the power of doing the regular check-in with our people shows us that there is a change. We can dig into the specific comments of the virtuals to educate what practices we need to change in order to increase that engagement level as well. We see that the belief is higher in the virtual people and the well-being is slightly lower in the virtual workforce than in office. From some of the feedback we're having is when I go to office, I at least get up, I at least get my social interactions, I at least get my feet moving. Whereas the virtuals is, well, I could probably do better on my well-being, so that we know we need to target some of our well-being practices and encouragements more to the virtual workforce than to the office side. But as I said before, if we look at it only one-sided, we could potentially panic here. Not really, right? But if the difference was bigger in the ENPS, the engagement levels with office and virtual, we would go, oh my God, what's going on in our virtual? There's something wrong. But if we look at the data from a different perspective as well, and let's look at the retention, the turnover, and the attrition across these. Just like anybody else, and we heard it in the previous presentation as well, retaining staff is key. Just like retaining customers in a commercial setting is easier than attracting and gaining new customers and new employees. Here it's clear that our virtual employees, we are better at retaining them than we are retaining our office employees. Our turnover rates are lower, our attrition rates are lower in the virtual setting. And that is an interesting dynamic if we think about the Amazon example, which is probably everybody's aware of them now announcing they're bringing all their people back to office. We could jump on that bandwagon as well, but what would we lose, right? And I think it is important to see if we choose to move people into offices from a virtual setting, what's the cost of that? And what are the considerations that we need to make sure that we take as part of such a decision? Another element from a data standpoint, and again, looking at it from different angles, is if we look at it from a flexibility standpoint, flexibility, management support, peer relationship, and environment. Those would be normally two that would skew the results dramatically between office and virtual. Because do you have the same level of flexibility when you work in office as you do virtually? Well, there is a sentiment that you do. The perception is there, even though it is a little higher in the virtual, which is what we want to make sure that people are feeling. The flexibility to do the work when they need to do the work, do the chores that they need to do at the same time as they do the work. The flexibility is a balance, right? Because we need to get the work done. We need to service the clients at a time that they need to be serviced, but we also need to take care of ourselves and that benefit of being virtual versus going to the office. Management support is there. So the trainings we were talking about earlier may seem to be having an effect, but let's not take that at face value, and we can dig into those details further as well. Peer relationship is one that I'm really proud of, actually, because the balance between our virtual and our office is very well here. It speaks to our town halls. It speaks to the way that our managers are managing their people in making sure that those that are virtual are included and feeling part of something bigger than themselves, feeling part of BCD Travel and the team that they're dedicated to work for. And then environment. Even if the environment seems to have a balanced approach as well. And it's especially flexibility and environment that you would see the vast differences coming out. But here they're very balanced between the virtual and the office employees, and therefore no scare about are we doing good enough for the virtuals, but also no need to bring them back to the office to cater to any of this because it's fine and it currently seems to be working. But my advice is constant measurement. Let's make sure that we continue to follow it. Just because they were happy, engaged, and felt flexible a month or two ago, let's continue to follow their sentiment so that we can set in with practices or changes as need be. As a further element, and I think it's evidenced, as I said in the beginning, I am a bit of a data geek because I do think it's important to understand your data. I do think it's important to look at your data and not be scared to see what the data tells you as long as you're using it in the right direction. Here we're taking a look at what is our ENPS for the virtual and the office-based people in age brackets, right? We see we have a very high office ENPS in general, and the virtual ENPS is filing a little bit behind, is not much. But if we look down at what is important as well as part of this is the office attrition and the virtual attrition across the age groups as well. We do seem to see that more of our office-based people are leaving us. So their engagement may be higher as we saw, but we're not as good as retaining those that sit in office. And if I spin it positive, we're great at retaining those that sit virtual, even though that is some of the hesitation I know companies have when they want their workforce to go global. Oh, they're probably not doing anything. We can't retain them because we're not in contact with them. Well, there are means and methods to do that. And I think what we're here to share today is not to say that what we're doing is what you should be doing, but it's an example of it can be done if it's adapted and attuned to who you are as an organization and how you work with these things. If we look at it from a tenure perspective, and this is a very busy slide, but if we hone in on the orange line here, which is the office ENPS and the virtual ENPS, we're seeing that those that have the shortest tenure seems to have the highest level of engagement when they're in the office. I think that speaks to when you're new in your career, it's important for you to have a face-to-face relationship, especially in a learning environment. When you need to learn new, you need to know that you're not the only one learning new. So that peer-peer relationship is important. So this tells us that in the first part of people's career, we get the best level of engagement if we bring them into office. And you'll see as more and more they gain in the year, the virtual ENPS overtakes the office ENPS, only to be substituted when you have above 15 years of tenure. That's where it goes back to be, well, I'd rather be in an office than sitting at home. And there can be many social, economic, and individual family reasons for that, but knowing it will allowing you to take advantage of that and help to diversify in the workforce as well. Who is it good to offer it to? Who is it not? As a manager, who do I need to be more aware of in my workforce to make sure that I keep a high level of engagement combined with a low attrition? The last one I want to show on this from a statistics standpoint is if we look at it from a regional perspective. Remember, we're about 15,000 people around the world, so we are represented in all the regions of the world. APAC, we have a higher engagement level in the office, even though we still have a higher attrition in office as well. Part of the explanation for the higher ENPS in the offices and the higher turnover in offices is that a lot of our people in APAC are office-based. There are two reasons for that. In our world, going virtual in APAC is we're not ready for that in all markets. Not ready from a management perspective, but also not ready from a service perspective because we run big call centers out in that region. And from a call center perspective, there is a tradition to bring people together because the power of those dynamics benefits our customers. Nonetheless, we continue to offer it. We continue to see if there's an appetite to do it, but we know that we will probably see a higher office-based population out in APAC. And if we then look at it from a regional perspective, it's interesting how the flip is. When we elevate ourselves from what we looked at earlier, from brackets of tenure, brackets of age, and look at it regionally, the virtual ENPS is higher at a regional level. And therefore, don't take one set and one dimension of data at face value. See if we can look at the data from many different viewpoints in order to make sure that we're getting the best use of our data and making the best decisions and the best practice implementations on that. As an example of practice, I'm very proud to share with you our work from anywhere at BCD. We have decided to go above the virtual, which originally meant you sit at home. And if you're office, you sit in office. Now we're telling you, you can sit anywhere. We started that a couple of years ago, and we've doubled our applicant uptake year over year. Our people spend an average of 23 days as per application. So it's not months on end, which again was an education for us, right? Let's try this out. Let's see how much people will have to travel and how long they want to be gone before we stop it, because we had a fear in the beginning. Oh my God, we can't have people sitting 3 months in APAC if they work in Europe, and we have to force them to work night shift because they're still on European hours. Let's test it out. Let's see what the results is. 23 days, we can do that. Some of the examples, we've had Uwe from Germany go to Las Palmas in the Canary Islands. We've had Lacey travel from the UK to Australia, all with the purpose of, we are not necessarily interested in their motivation. We want to be a employer of choice that respects that we are people-centric as an organization. We are a family organization, and we want to show that care to our employees as well. So here, Lacey went all the way to Australia. We have another example here of Paolo, who went from Spain to Argentina to visit his grandmother while he was working for us as well. And Tassos, who went from UK to Japan and still kept his work going for him. A quick couple of pointers if you would consider implementing a work from anywhere policy. Our advice is you limit the days per destination to make sure that you stay within the tax and social security regulations. Make sure that there is an agreement between the employee and you that the conditions of the home country remains in place. Should we change the salary for somebody who goes to a lower cost country, or should we increase it? No, we're giving you this opportunity based on the package and working agreement that you're having with us now. Also, from a legal perspective, in order to protect your permanent establishment, you cannot represent the company at the destination. If it's a management or commercial activity, consider doing it a business trip instead. And then the famous word bleisure, right? It should be covered in your T&E policy. Do you allow for people to tack on vacation days on a business trip? I think you should, because it's highly engaging. If you're anyway in Atlanta, you can visit the Coca-Cola Museum or the old Olympic Stadium and tack on a few days, because you're coming back using your vacation from that, but coming back motivated and saying, that's part of the flexibility in my workforce. And the last is a little question that we won't answer today, but I'll leave you with that. Many of these points you would go, well, is digital nomad a valid consideration? Yes, it is. But there's a lot more conversation to be had. We personally have not embarked on that, because what we believe is that you will lose the connection to your people because they're no longer yours. They become contingent workers, and thereby the culture I talked about and the 3 F's will probably be gone, and you'll not have the ability to measure engagement and retention the way that we're currently doing. We're happy with our setup, and I'm happy to have shared with you this morning our experience. And currently, back to office or not, my vote is on not. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Christian, for sharing what you guys are doing. It's great to see a real live example. And I think as a travel company, you guys have the opportunity to showcase this work from anywhere type of business model more easily than maybe some other companies. It was really insightful. Thank you for sharing all of that here. Any last word of advice for anybody that you want to share in the last minute here?
No, I think it's the advice I would say is what I've said throughout the presentation. Be careful at taking anything at face value, because there will be a pressure from employees who hear about, oh, I have a buddy who's a digital nomad, I want to do that as well. And the pitfall could be that you jump on that and say, of course, we want one of those too, right? But my advice would be, take a step back, consider what it is that works for your organization, and don't necessarily be driven what's popular right now. I could be an advice to many people around the world in other aspects as well, but I'm not trying to be a professor or expert or anything, but that would be my advice. Be careful and make it your own, because if you don't own it, you can't make it part of your culture and forge it into your culture.
Well, great. Thank you so much for that. And I think you're, like I said, shining a great example in terms of how to work with all these different types of work models. And I personally, I would agree with you that you can't really force everybody back. People want the flexibility. So anyway, Thank you so much, Christian, for your time and contributing here today. And we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.